Don't you love going to a restaurant and getting a free refill? If only topping off our groundwater was so easy. Nebraska farmers use it for irrigation, and the majority of people in the state rely on it for their drinking water. But sometimes the groundwater is depleted before it can be replenished. I spoke with UNL Hydrologist Dr. Troy Gilmore about the research being done to estimate the state's groundwater.
Groundwater is hugely important to Nebraska. 88% of the folks in Nebraska depend on groundwater for their drinking water, including practically everyone in the rural areas of Nebraska. We have the most irrigated acres of any state in the U.S. and about 7.7 million acres that are irrigated with groundwater and about 7.4 million acre feet applied. And so obviously that means groundwater is hugely important to Nebraskans and for our health and our drinking water and for our agricultural production.
And what are recharge rates and how that relates to groundwater?
So groundwater recharge rate is the rate at which groundwater is being replenished in our aquifers. So it's a really important value that's related to how much groundwater is stored in the saturated sediments below our feet here in Nebraska. And it's something that's really actually pretty difficult to measure because it varies a lot over space, over different areas of the state, and also over time. We're always looking for new ways to measure groundwater recharge or estimate it. And then we compare often those results with previous studies to see if there's agreement, if we're kind of solidifying previous knowledge, or if we are kind of bringing a new angle on how much groundwater recharge we have.
Gotcha. So the research that's being done by you and your colleagues is attempting to estimate the recharge rate in a more consistent way. So could you give us a little bit of an overview on that research?
Yes, so we recently published some groundwater recharge rates for 3 areas in Nebraska. And the essence of the research is that we were looking at groundwater levels between pairs of streams. So the patterns of groundwater levels between 2 streams, which you can imagine stream valleys, right, that have a lower surface elevation or land surface elevation, and then there are areas between the streams that have higher surface elevation. And what we often find is that groundwater levels will mimic that land surface. And so along with Dr. Vitaly Zlotnik and one of my graduate students, we applied a very simple model to 3 areas in Nebraska, in the Sandhills, northeast Nebraska, and southwest Nebraska, to estimate groundwater recharge rate. And those rates came out, for the most part, on par with other estimates from those vicinities.
And what do you think are some ways that farmers will benefit as a result of this research?
So I think that any new approaches to groundwater recharge estimation are a real benefit for groundwater management in Nebraska. Mm-hmm. As I said, we're always trying to look for new ways because it's difficult to measure. And so these data, these results, can feed into much more complex models that are then used ultimately to make management decisions that impact farmers. Going forward, I think we need to continue to monitor the groundwater levels. I think there are probably ways that we can improve our monitoring. And then we also want to look at technologies and new approaches for managing the groundwater so that we can sustain its use for agricultural production and also to maintain stream flows in those areas.
Do you think that most farmers have a pretty good understanding of groundwater and how it relates to what they're trying to accomplish?
When I have a chance to talk with farmers, I find that they have often a really good practical knowledge of what is happening, particularly with their own irrigation wells. Maybe they've tried to drill wells and maybe they've had success or not. They're very aware of those practical issues. Some of the places that they can go for groundwater data and reports are the Department of Natural Resources website, which is excellent. We also have with the Conservation and Survey Division a report that comes out annually, and it's based largely on a lot of the data that are collected by natural resource districts across Nebraska. And that report is very comprehensive, it's statewide, and it tells us a lot about how groundwater levels are changing across the state.